that's why we are leaders. We want you. You are one of the vibrant members of parliament. You need to represent your people. But I think going forward, Mr. Speaker, I think you need the communication you're going to give either way, Mr. Speaker, is going to set a precedent for even future parliament. So I think it's a very, very weighty matter, both constitutionally, looking at the rights of the member of parliament, the rights of his voters, the rights of political parties, who is a parliamentary party, do you have the numbers? And the Speaker, on a small joke, you know, in the pastoralist, Honorable Chachuganya, a man who has so many camels, will agree with me. I don't know about Honorable Millie, how the fishermen behave, or the fisherwomen. But in the pastoralist, those who have got small goats and few animals, their decision is made by those who own 100 camels. You know, the big, those who own 200 cows, because even during drought, they help him. When there's no milk, when there's a crisis. So this is why, you know, the minority and the majority, you have to coalesce around something. Honorable Ochieng, if you are very uncomfortable with the minority, nothing will stop you. We will still do the calculation with Honorable Bandi, and if we find a slot, we will give you. So you are not isolated as such. So if you feel, because me, I thought you are more comfortable with the minority, even for your 2022 politics, but if you don't want them and they want to quarantine you, please join us. We'll do the numbers with Honorable Bandi as the Speaker gives us the communication, because we don't want to deny, we want to respect each and every member here. All that we want to do is that we must have and follow the minority and the majority and agree on who is a parliamentary party. Speaker, you know there are many people, but you need to declare in your communication who are parliamentary parties in this house. It is Jubilee, ODM, and Wiper. The rest must look for someone to surrogate. You must look for somebody to surrogate around. And the problem is not us. The problem is the people of Kenya. So, no, Amani is not a parliamentary party. Fort Kenya is not a parliamentary party. MDG is not a parliamentary party. So I think, the Speaker, even in your communication, it's good the country knows who is a parliamentary party. But I'm sure that, in fact, this matter Honorable Cheng has raised is not only for him. I think even for future parliaments, and even for future independent members of parliament, if they feel like they don't want to work with the minority or the majority, then being a member of parliament, they have rights, then I think your communication, Mr. Speaker, will be, and I'm sure you're up to the task, that this is a serious matter and you'll give us direction.
Yeah, I think we don't. I don't think we require to. No, I'll deal with the matter. You know, it's not very complex. I know the spirit. And those of you who are in the last parliament, Honorable Millie, there was a reason why we landed some things around 174. Yes. And I think, but anyway, we'll deal with it. We'll deal with it. It's not. Every member is entitled really to serve in a committee. That's a fact, whether independent or belonging to a party. It is how they get into those places, those committees that we need to determine. So I think we can leave that one at that. Let's just leave it to rest, Honorable Boy. I see there is another request from the Honorable Otiende Amolo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise under Standing Order number 1, sub 1, on a procedural question of which I invite and seek your direction. Mr. Speaker, this is the question of the procedure for removal of a member of the Parliamentary Service Commission. noting, Mr. Speaker, that this is a matter that touches on the Constitution, it touches on the Parliamentary Services Act, it touches on the standing orders. Mr. Speaker, I recall your communication that you made on 22nd of February 2018 during the debate on the names of the members of the Parliamentary Service Commission. And Mr. Speaker, I wish also to draw your attention to a meeting that was held actually in this chamber by one of the coalitions, the NASA coalition, on the 28th of May last month, which was attended by 124 members, either in person or by proxy. And Mr. Speaker, those members, as members of the coalition, reached a unanimous decision and resolved to effect certain changes to the composition of the Parliamentary Service Commission. Mr. Speaker, I seek your guidance because it is important to have this guidance before we take any action and to avoid either acting in vain, unnecessary contention, and unnecessary varied interpretation of the relevant provisions. Mr. Speaker, we are aware, and no one can doubt, that the Parliamentary Service Commission is a constitutional commission under Article 248. And that invites the interpretation, quite arguable, that any question of removal of a member of the commission must be under Article 251 of the Constitution, as read with Standing Order number 230. That argument can be persuasive and has been made by some members of this House. But, Mr. Speaker, it is also to be noted that, first, Article 248, which lists the constitutional commissions and lists the requirements, is very express and says, except to the extent that this Constitution provides otherwise. And therefore the question, Mr. Speaker, is that, is there any other part of the Constitution that provides different from what Article 251 does? And the answer appears to be yes. That is Article 127. Mr. Speaker, while Article 251 talks of removal from office, Article 127 talks of vacation of office. Mr. Speaker, a close examination of Article 127 reveals something that is interesting and is not often noted. First of all, Mr. Speaker, under 127, sub-article 2C, it says, Parliament, in terms of composition, 7 members appointed by Parliament from among the members, appointed. The process we have voluntarily adopted usually here includes some form of election. But the words used in the Constitution is appointed. Mr. Speaker, that word becomes very important because when you come to Article 127(4), sub-article B, it says, a member of the Commission shall vacate office, not be removed. Vacate office, B, if the person is an appointed member on revocation of the person's appointment by Parliament. There are 3 catchphrases, Mr. Speaker. It uses the word appointed, similar to the word used when they're being so-called elected. 2, it says it's on revocation. So it's a different consideration from removal in Article 251. And then thirdly, it says revocation of that appointment by Parliament, which means that removal will not just be done by one house. It has to be done by both houses. Mr. Speaker, if that interpretation is correct, and I'm more persuaded by it, and I can tell you, having been a member of the Committee of Experts, that we paid due consideration to the uniqueness of the Parliamentary Service Commission. That because it is us members who appoint people to that commission, we want them to serve our purposes. And if they don't, then we must have the liberty to revoke that appointment at will. Indeed, even without giving any reasons. Because when we appointed them, we are not required to give reasons. And so, Mr. Speaker, that interpretation then falls in tandem with Section 10 of the Parliamentary Services Act that we passed last year. Under Section 10, what is required is a motion, initially supported by a quarter of the members. In this case, it would be 87. Then once it's presented, then the motion will carry the day if it's supported by a third of all the members. And then a select committee of 11 is appointed. They will examine the issue and report. And once satisfied, this House will effect that change and communicate to the other House, which must follow a similar process. Mr. Speaker, if that interpretation is correct, and I'm seeking to persuade you that it is, then, Mr. Speaker, the guidance would draw us away from Article 251 and draw us away from Standing Order 230. And it would focus on Article 127 and the provisions of Section 10 of the Parliamentary Services Act. And if that is done, Mr. Speaker, then we would be able to very smoothly handle this question, which again is a question that has not always been resolved very clearly. Mr. Speaker, I seek your guidance on the matter, proactively to avoid contention and acrimony, and I invite your guidance accordingly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Bandi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I want to first start by thanking the Senior Counsel MP for Ariada, Honorable Tiende Amolo, for raising this matter at this stage. Mr. Speaker, it is true that I chaired a parliamentary group meeting of the National Assembly for NASA Coalition last week. And Mr. Speaker, in that meeting, 108 members out of 135 were physically present, and 16 members sent apology, including the member in question, whom I just want to refer to, the member of the Parliamentary Service Commission, the parliamentary group passed a resolution to recall from the commission. And so, Mr. Speaker, while seated there chairing the meeting, members unanimously agreed, Mr. Speaker, through a motion which was moved and seconded, and there was a unanimous vote. In fact, there was not even a single dissent from the parliamentary group that they had lost confidence in the representation of this member to the Parliamentary Service Commission as a coalition. And Mr. Speaker, the Constitution is clear under Article 127 that the composition of the Parliamentary Service Commission shall be as followed. Apart from the Speaker, which is clearly designated, unless we pass a vote of no confidence, unless we impeach you, Mr. Speaker, and we remove you from that seat, you will definitely be the chair of this commission up to 2022. Mr. Speaker, the other members, 7, shall be 4 will come from the majority party. In this case, it is the Jubilee Coalition. And 3 shall come from the minority coalition or minority party, which in this case is NASA Coalition. And then there are 2 who will come from outside. So, Mr. Speaker, our reasoning then, and which I want to persuade you to rule on, and if possible, rule affirmatively, is that you cannot fail to fire a person you hire. Even normal law of natural justice, the only thing you are required to do is to follow a process so that there is due process of the law. But, Mr. Speaker, as Honorable Tiende has put it clearly, this is clearly spelled out as an appointment in the Constitution. And again, the same Constitution speaks to the removal of an appointed member, that it can again be done through revocation of that appointment by Parliament. But, Mr. Speaker, those who have been reasoning and arguing that Parliamentary Service Commission must also follow the provisions, the removal from Parliamentary Service Commission must follow the provisions of Article 251, Mr. Speaker, just because Parliamentary Service Commission is listed under Article 248. I think where they are missing the point is that the framers of this Constitution provided exemptions and said under Article 248 that except to the extent that the Constitution provides otherwise. And I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, if you look at this Constitution, it talks about the commissions that under Article 250 in this chapter, that each commission shall consist of at least 3, but not more than 9. If you calculate the membership of Parliamentary Service Commission, Mr. Speaker, there are 10. The Speaker is the 7 members coming from Parliament and 2 members from outside. The totality of that is 10, which means it does not respect this provision. And I think that is keyword because the provision under Article 248 had already envisaged that there could be some commissions that may not strictly follow the provisions of this chapter. I can mention many other things, Mr. Speaker, including that the secretary to the commissions should be appointed by the commission. In our case, it is clearly defined in the Constitution, and you can't change it. Mr. Speaker, the other thing that I also wanted to mention about this commission is that if you follow Article 251, Mr. Speaker, it is clear that that there will be a petition. That petition will be considered by Parliament, will be considered by the National Assembly. Then the National Assembly, having been satisfied with the position, will pass it. Then the President shall appoint a tribunal. Then the President, in the case of Parliamentary Service Commission, Mr. Speaker, does not appoint the commissioners. Those commissioners where the President's appointment is required are the ones which are supposed to follow the provisions of Article 251. But this Parliamentary Service Commission is a function of Parliament entirely. Actually, these are the people who fight for the welfare of members of Parliament, so to speak. These are trade unionists, Mr. Speaker. You are actually chairing a trade union for these members of Parliament. That is your basic role. The trade unions must represent the union members. And in this case, union members are members of Parliament. If we feel you are not representing us well, Mr. Speaker, we should have the space, the liberty to get you out of office so that we get people who can represent us very well. Mr. Speaker, that is why you find sometimes we are not very happy with commissioners, but we are forced to live with them for 5 years or 6 years if a commissioner has been brought from outside. Mr. Speaker, I want to request you and seek that you rule that these commissioners, we can revoke, as the Constitution says, their appointment to this commission as a house which has appointed them. And so that we can be able to have a commission which will represent the interests of these members of Parliament. I am not saying that this commission has failed in total, but I'm saying if there is a member of that commission, 1 or 2 or even all, we should be able as a house to recall them. We should be able as a house to reprimand them. Mr. Speaker, that is my contention, and I beg that you rule. Thank you.
Now, I see that the member for Ugenya wants to weigh in on this also.
Mr. Speaker, thank you so much. I know I'm isolated. Probably I'm quarantined. Mr. Speaker, I want to agree with the adage that he who appoints should have the powers to fire. Mr. Speaker, one unique thing about our new constitution is about how it deals with so many issues independently. Mr. Speaker, the provisions for removing commissioners at 251 are okay, but I agree with Honorable Tiende that the PSC is a self-contained commission with very clear procedures of appointment that doesn't go to the public. They're done from here, just like the CRA, the Commission of Revenue and Allocation. Now, Speaker, as you make your ruling on this matter, I just want to draw your attention to just 2 things. That under 127, there are appointments through 2 ways. Appointment through appointment and appointment through nomination. And that law indicates how each is dealt with. That's why it says those appointed and these are the members of parliament really, who are nominated, Mr. Speaker, I suppose, is what they're talking about in 4A. Because the appointments, the 7 of them, under 1, 4 shall be by the majority, 3 by the minority. Those ones are the ones whose whose revocation happen by 1, end of their term, or 2, if they cease. Do you remember? So, Speaker, this is very important to be noted. And that's why number 2, that is now 4B, talks about those who are appointed through appointment by this assembly. So, Speaker, I know this is a very silly season in our country, and I pray for wisdom for you when dealing with this. Whether you will need an amendment to the Constitution to effect what some people really so much really want, so that you don't have to bend the law to meet whimsical. Because if we intended that a member of PSC serves for 5 years, we must live with it. If you come to that conclusion, that this was the intention because of the provisions on how they're going to vacate office, it is intended that once appointed, they'll serve for their full term, or when they cease to hold office. The other 2 are the ones that we provide for, that Parliament can disappoint, as it were. So, Mr. Speaker, this is not a cut and dried issue, as the 2 members would want us to believe. It is something that requires a lot of wisdom, looking at, based on that fact, that the same law that provides how they're appointed provides how they'll vacate office. Mr. Speaker, those are my comments on this matter.
And I see Honorable Sankok also wants to weigh.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, yes, 4 commissioners from the majority side, 3 from the minority, and 2 who are independent, who are appointed by this House. Honorable Speaker, even a member of Parliament who is supposed to serve for 5 years, there is a process of recalling that particular member of Parliament. Honorable Speaker, if you have been appointed by a group or by somebody, then that person has the power to disappoint you. If you are hired, that person has the power to fire you. As far as the due process of the law is followed, we cannot say, Honorable Speaker, that now, since you have been appointed as a commissioner, you can go and do whatever you want to do and disappoint those who appointed you and remain there because you have 5 years. Honorable Speaker, it is not possible. Even the president, there is a process of removing the president. Honorable Speaker, you are the 3rd most powerful person in the country, but there is a process of removing you from that seat, Honorable Speaker. Not 2nd, he's the 3rd most powerful person in the country. Honorable Speaker, so what I'm simply saying is that if the ODM or NASA coalition followed the due process of the law in removing Aisha Juma, Honorable Speaker, then your communication will be to that effect. The process of the law must be followed. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Russell.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for this opportunity. Honorable Speaker, Article 251(2). A person desiring the removal of a member of commission or of a holder of an independent office on any ground specified in Clause 1 may present a petition to the National Assembly setting out the alleged facts constituting that ground. Mr. Speaker, this House is the seat of democracy in this land. It is where democracy must be fiercely protected. Mr. Speaker, in democracy, they say the majority will have their way and the minority will have their say. 2 of very fundamental issues that touching on the member for Ugenya, and this particular one on Parliamentary Service Commission have been presented before you. Mr. Speaker, when we look at the political landscape in this country, over the last few months, there's a lot that is going on. But this House must pronounce itself to the rule of law and constitutionalism, so that even the minorities in this House, they must feel protected. Article 95 of our Constitution is a very important article. Article 94 on the role of Parliament is clear on what is expected both of this House, and Article 95 on what is expected of us as individual members, or even the appointed, such as 001, in terms of protecting the fundamentals of this Constitution, which protect each and every citizen of our country. Mr. Speaker, finally, I want to really say this. Nothing shall hinder the independence of Parliament. We can have our different political persuasion, but the independence of the National Assembly is fundamental. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Danita Gatti, you want to weigh on this one, or is it about something different?
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for this opportunity to weigh in. Mr. Speaker, sir, I want really, because we are talking about Parliamentary Service Commission, and Mr. Speaker, I want from the onset to just say, on behalf of persons with disabilities, Mr. Speaker, that majority of commissions in this country, Mr. Speaker, do not obey the rule of inclusivity when it comes to persons with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, sir, Parliamentary Service Commission, and it is good we are discussing Parliamentary Service Commission, Mr. Speaker, because we have noted as members who represent persons with disabilities, Mr. Speaker, that such an important body, that is PSC, Parliamentary Service Commission, Mr. Speaker, must actually pronounce itself to where it places persons or members with disability. Mr. Speaker, sir, the composition of PSC, the Parliamentary Service Commission in this country, must also look at that issue, Mr. Speaker. We cannot say PSC can be on its own when you are looking at NGEC and when you are looking at the CAJ that they comply. Mr. Speaker, sir, having said that, I want to say, for me, Mr. Speaker, that if a political party appoints or nominates a member to represent the political party into any commission, it is the prerogative and responsibility, Mr. Speaker, of the member who has been appointed and given that opportunity to actually represent the political party. What is the point, Mr. Speaker? Because we all pay allegiance to political parties, we all pay allegiance to our coalitions. Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to really support and say that Parliamentary Service Commission, just like any other commission in this country, must also pronounce itself very clearly, Mr. Speaker, where persons with disabilities fall when we are talking about inclusivity in this country. Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to stop there.
Honorable Tom Oluoch, member for Madare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to agree entirely, and I'm persuaded by the arguments advanced by Honorable Otiende Amolo and ably supported by my minority leader. Mr. Speaker, in short, what I seems to be gathering from this argument is that the House, or in your ruling, we should be persuaded that deference should be given to Article 127 of the Constitution to the extent that the procedure there takes precedent over that in 251. In short, what 127 seems to be saying, and I'm persuaded, is that a member in PAC can be de-whipped the same way you de-whip members from a committee, because that is the nominating entity. The only thing, Mr. Speaker, that I want to persuade you to add in your ruling when you're considering this ruling is that under Article 147 of the Constitution and the Fair Administrative Actions Act, there would ordinarily be the requirement to be given the opportunity to be heard when you're de-whipping. And I want to persuade you to find or to put in your ruling that for purposes of Article 47 and the Fair Administration Actions Act, the provision under Section 10 of the Parliamentary Service Act, to the extent that it forms a committee that will give that opportunity, will suffice, and there is no reason to defer back to the political party to form a disciplinary forum for purposes of being heard. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Very well. Looks like, did I see the Honorable Mbui? Yes. The Honorable Mbui doesn't appear to have a card.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I think, Mr. Speaker, when I look at the arguments forwarded by the two sides, because I've had one talk about Article 251, it is true that 251 actually talks about independent commissions and office holders. But when I look at the Constitution of Kenya, Article 127 is specifically about the Parliamentary Service Commission. And so I want to imagine that because this is specific about Parliamentary Service Commission, and it talks about the way by which a member can vacate office, I would be persuaded to imagine that this really is the one that we should be following, because the other one, 251, talks about all commissions and independent office holders, but this is specific to Parliamentary Service Commission, which is actually the point, or rather that is a commission that we are concerned about in this House. Thank you, Chair.
Very well. I think we'll give a ruling on it. Next order.
Order number 8, procedural motion, limitation of debate.
Leader Majority.
Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 91, subsection 1, and notwithstanding the resolution of the House of February 18, 2020, this House further resolves that during the sitting of the House from June the 4th, 2020 to July the 2nd, 2020, each speech in the debate on bills, motions, including special motions, sessional papers, and committee reports shall be limited as follows. A maximum of 2 hours, with not more than 10 minutes for the mover in moving and 5 minutes in replying, a maximum for 5 minutes for any other member speaking, except for the leader of majority party, the leader of the minority party, and the chairperson of the relevant committee, who shall be limited to a maximum of 10 minutes, and that priority in speaking be accorded to the leader of the majority party, the leader of the minority party, and the chairperson of the relevant committee in that order, provided that the resolution shall not apply not only to the second reading of the finance bill and the debate of the budget and estimates and the committee of supply for the financial year 2020-2021. So, Mr. Speaker, the House Business Committee under your chair felt that because of the situation in which we are in, we want to create time limit for bills and motions, give more members time to speak, and reduce, the time which was being given to the mover and the seconder, except for 3 items which are important to the people of Kenya: the finance bill, the budget estimates, and the committee of supply for the financial year 2020-2021. So this is just only for this period between now, in fact, between Thursday, this week, until July the 2nd, when we shall go for a short recess, if the House agrees with the calendar. So there is a procedural motion before us. It's meant to guide the House on the manner in which debate will be carried out. It seeks to set timelines for members contributing before the House And I beg to move and ask the leader of minority to second, because he's a member of the House business.
Ambadi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, actually, I second this motion. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing really much to say about the motion that has been moved by the leader of majority because it's a procedural motion. We are just trying to set ground rules on how many or what amount of time is available for the mover, the seconder, and also for other members speaking, and the leadership of the House from both sides. So, Mr. Speaker, I second. Mr. Speaker, my only issue, Mr. Speaker, was the two issues that were raised. Mr. Speaker, the two issues that were raised. Honorable Chepkut, Mr. Speaker, the two issues that were raised earlier, you know, they affect mostly minority side. I was requesting for an indication of possible time of making the ruling because you know, when you contact trace and you find someone needs isolation, that isolation needs to be done quickly. Otherwise, others may be infected. So that's my request, that if possible, the rulings are made quickly, possibly this week, Thursday, so that I can start the process of dealing with Aisha Juma. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I second.
Honorable Band, we'll do it on Tuesday. Yes. I propose the question, which is that pursuant to provisions of Standing Order 97-1, and notwithstanding the resolution of the House of February 18, 2020, this House further resolves that during the sittings of the House from June 4th, 2020, July 2nd, 2020, each speech in debate on bills, motions, including special motions, sessional papers, and committee reports shall be limited as follows. A maximum of 2 hours with not more than 10 minutes for the mover in moving, 5 minutes in replying, and a maximum of 5 minutes for any other member speaking, except the leader of the majority party and the leader of the minority party, and the chairperson of the relevant committee, who shall be limited to a maximum of 10 minutes, and that priority in speaking be accorded to the leader of the majority party and leader of the minority party, and the chairperson of the relevant committee in that order. Provided that the resolution shall not apply to the second reading of the Finance Bill 2020, debate on the budget estimates and the committee of supply for the financial year 2020-2021. I put the question that the motion appearing as under number 8 be approved. Will as many as that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as the counter opinion say no? The ayes have it. Next.
Order number 9, the referendum bill, National Assembly Bill number 11 of 2020, first reading. A bill for an act of parliament to provide for the procedure of the approval of an amendment to the Constitution by a referendum, the conduct of a referendum petitions, and for connected purposes.
Next order.
Order number 10, motion, alteration of the calendar of the House.
Leader of Majority.
I beg to move that pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 28, subsection 4, this House resolves to further alter the calendar, that is the regular sessions for the 4th session of 2020, as amended on Tuesday, April 14th, 2020, and resolves, A, suspend its sittings of Wednesdays, morning and afternoon, during the month of June 2020, and the sitting of July 1st, 2020. B, hold sittings during the month of June 2020 as follows: morning and afternoon sittings on Tuesday, June 9th, June 16th, June 23rd, and June 30th, 2020, commencing at 10 a.m. and at 2:30 p.m. respectively. And Roman 2, afternoon sittings on Thursday, June the 4th, June the 11th, June the 18th, June the 25th, 2020 at 2:30 p.m. and C holders an afternoon sitting on Thursday, July the 2nd, 2020, commencing at 2:30 p.m. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure Kenyans are aware that the President and government is also trying to see how they can ease the COVID restrictions. So looking at the business before the House, the budget, the Committee of Supply, the Finance Bill, the House Business Committee under your leadership felt that we can sit twice a week. That is Tuesday afternoon, and then we allow the clerk's office to administer the necessary safety measures in the chamber on Wednesday, and then we have Thursday as a sitting in the afternoon. So Tuesday we'll sit full day, then Wednesday we have a break, and then our committees can sit on Wednesdays, and which is, Mr. Speaker, very good because even the subcommittee of cabinet sometimes now sit through the virtual network on Tuesdays. So we sit on Tuesday afternoon, morning and afternoon, and then Wednesday we allow the public health and our clerk and the parliament to take care about our safety of the chamber. And then Thursday afternoon we can have a session so that before we go on the short recess on the July the 2nd, we will have completed the budget estimates, we will have completed the Committee of Supply, and we will have completed the Finance Bill, which is important, and it has a deadline of 30th of June, 2020. So, Mr. Speaker, this was just now making sure that even Parliament cannot stay, where we had only one day in a week. Now we have 2 days in a week. Speaker, so the altering of the calendar will enable the House to conclude the business that we have, which are important, which have timelines, and is part of this session, and we do it in a timely manner. I'll ask the minority leader to support this procedural motion.
Honorable Mbadi.
Mr. Speaker, again, I support just by saying that in simple words, what we are calling for the month of June is to have 3 sittings. The sitting on Tuesday morning and afternoon, have Wednesday free for preparation for Thursday. Then Thursday we sit in the afternoon. So we will be sitting a little more than we have been sitting since this pandemic came a problem for us. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to ask this House to agree that for the month of June, we sit on Tuesdays, and that is beginning next week. We sit Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, and have a sitting for Thursday. And again, this is a period, Mr. Speaker, that is very busy. We are going to deal with issues of budget, issues of appropriation bills. There is the issue of finance bill. And, Mr. Speaker, I think we need these sittings. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I second.
I propose the question, which is that pursuant to the provision of Standing Order 28, subsection 4, this House resolves to further alter its calendar, regular sessions, for the 4th session, 2020, as amended on Tuesday, April 14, 2020, and resolves to A, suspend its sittings on Wednesdays, morning and afternoon, during the month of June 2020, and the sitting of July 1st, 2020. B, hold sittings during the month of June as follows. 1, morning and afternoon sittings on Tuesdays of June 9th, June 16th, June 23rd, and June 30th, 2020, commencing at 10 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. respectively. And 2, afternoon sittings on Thursdays of 4th June, June 11th, June 18th, June 25th at 2:30 p.m. And C, hold an afternoon sitting on Thursday, July 2nd, 2020, commencing at 2:30 p.m. Members, I believe the issue has been explained quite clearly by the Honorable John Bandy. Just to make sure that there is more sittings. But of course, honourable members, as you are all aware, the House as a House is still at liberty, depending on business, to even increase the sitting hours on any particular day. So the House is still at liberty to do that. So I put the question that pursuant to Professional Standing Order 28, subsection 4, this House resolves to further alter its calendar regular sessions for the fourth session 2020 as amended on Tuesday, April 14, 2020, and resolves to A, suspend its sittings of Wednesdays, morning and afternoon during the month of June 2020, and the sitting of July 1st, 2020. B, hold sittings during the month of June 2020 as follows. Roman 1, morning and afternoon sittings on Tuesdays of June 9th, June 16th, June 23rd, and June 30th, 2020, commencing at 10 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. respectively. Roman 2, afternoon sittings on Thursdays of June 4th, 11th, 18th, 20th, and 25th, 2020 at 2:30 p.m. And C, hold an afternoon sitting on Thursday, July 2nd, 2020, commencing at 2:30 p.m. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. So, honourable members, I think it is fair, and I hope that this is widely circulated, because we're going to have more sittings, so that members can indicate now, whether they want to attend morning sittings, particularly on Tuesdays and afternoons, or Thursdays. I think this increases the number of members who will be able to participate. So starting Tuesday next week, there will be morning sittings. Next order.
Order number 11, motion, establishment of an ad hoc committee on COVID-19 prevention, response, and management.
It's free for, there's no particular member who was on the floor. The motion had been moved by the Honorable Ngujiri Wambugu, seconded by the Honorable Otiende Amolo. So debate can continue. I assume that we just go by the list. I see the Honorable Sankok is the first on the board.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. And thank you, Honorable Wambogo, for bringing such a very important motion at this particular time that we are faced with this international pandemic. Honorable Speaker, this pandemic has crippled our economy, not only in Kenya, but all over the world. Honorable Speaker, our businesses are dying. Our people are suffering, and more specifically, persons with disability. Honorable Speaker, and I will start by thanking the President of the Republic of Kenya for setting aside 200 million to cushion vulnerable persons with disability. Targeting is taking place. The majority of them will be receiving a stipend at every end of the month to cushion them from this particular pandemic. That is on top of the cash transfer to severely disabled persons. Honorable Speaker, this motion is very important because this disease is highly contagious, and we need as a House to come in and allocate funds to be able to fight such a pandemic, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, and let us remind our people to stay safe by sanitizing, by keeping social distance, by washing hands, Honorable Speaker, and other countries have taken even some drastic measures, Honorable Speaker. Here in Europe, it is now illegal, Honorable Speaker, for people to move from one house to another, Honorable Speaker. In our case, we are allowed 15 people, Honorable Speaker. So, Honorable Speaker, the mover did bring a motion that is very important. And we are lucky, Honorable Speaker, that this disease is not airborne, because if it was airborne, even in this particular building, it would have been very dangerous. We are lucky, Honorable Speaker, that this disease is not an STI, sexually transmitted, Honorable Speaker. As far as you wear a mask, keep social distance in all engagements, Honorable Speaker, it is a disease that is through contact, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, so I support this motion 100%, Honorable Speaker, so that the House will be viewed or will be seen as it is caring for its citizens, Honorable Speaker. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. I do support.
Honorable Rosanna Pasaris, member for Nairobi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this particular motion was brought to the House before we broke for recess, and it was shot down for various reasons. I'm a member of the Health Committee, and when you look at COVID, COVID is a health crisis. It's a health pandemic all over the world. And of course, it has social and economic effects as well. And when we look at the members that were put in this particular select committee that the honorable member wants to put forward, we realize that there are hardly any members of the health committee there. And
Honorable Otiende, Dr. Omolo, what's the point of order?
Madam Speaker, it is not my intention, and I would never take pleasure in interrupting the honorable member for Nairobi. But she commences by saying this particular motion was brought and it was shot down. As a matter of fact, debate had not commenced. So whether supporting or not is okay, but I think that particular part should be corrected. Thank you.
Yeah, that's correct, Honorable Pasaris. We are actually beginning debate on the motion. So you can write that, correct that.
okay, thank you. I stand corrected, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, at that particular time when we were sitting down and when we were having this discussion in the House, we actually were of the opinion that we already have many committees in Parliament. And every committee is handling whichever area of the coronavirus that its particular committee has to handle. Like for us, we handle all matters pertaining to health in the Health Committee. Now, when I looked at this list of members, that the membership of the committee, I realized that you cannot be discussing a health pandemic as a committee and avoid members of the Health Committee. And even if they were to include the members of the Health Committee, then we would ask ourselves, at which particular point are we going to be able to contribute and take effect in terms of COVID? In our own mother committee, which is the Health Committee, or in this select committee? Madam Speaker, we have something called the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals, if we were supposed to think of a committee that a select committee that needs to be formed, then we have to look at the Sustainable Development Goals. But why haven't we had a Sustainable Development Goals committee, select committee? It's because each and every committee in this House addresses the area pertaining to whatever issue we have as a country. And I was just feeling that this particular COVID prevention and response management would be a duplication of what we are all doing in our various respective committees. And if it was not supposed to be a duplication, then we would be forced then to decide, maybe in the health committee, we do not discuss matters COVID because there is now this other select committee. So it creates, I think it creates a kind of confusion because anything pertaining to COVID concerns each and every member of this House. So if you're going to form a prevention, response and management, then how do you do it and only have a few members inclusive in that decision in terms of COVID? Because here in Nairobi, we have a lot of issues and we're also having concerns. But I feel that if we're going to have any response, it should be the entire House. It cannot be just a few particular individuals like as we've seen here. So for me, I oppose this on the strength that all members of Parliament, duly elected, whether Senate, whether National Assembly, we are all concerned with COVID. We cannot say that just a few members are the ones who are more responsible or more concerned about COVID. And in our respective committees, I think we deal with all these matters, and I think there'll be a duplication. If there is a select committee that we need, is one that will actually deal with SDGs, because the SDGs are currently completely challenged. But even that, we are all told in our respective committees to handle matters pertaining to the SDGs. So for me, Madam Speaker, I oppose.
Let's have the Honorable Denita Gatti.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for the opportunity to support, Madam Speaker, and say this. Madam Speaker, this committee, the ad hoc committee on COVID-19, it is a great idea, Madam Speaker, by the member for Nyeri Town, the Honorable Ngujiri. Madam Speaker, because it has come at a very, very opportune time that it seeks to cushion and it seeks to find answers, Madam Speaker, to the pandemic that is COVID-19 in this country.
Honorable Gatti, I thought you were moving an amendment to the motion.
Madam Speaker, I want to also move an amendment, Madam Speaker.
So go straight to the amendment.
Madam Speaker, I want to move this amendment, Madam Speaker, simply because of the lack of inclusivity and inclusion on the part of membership to the committee. Madam Speaker, I seek to move an amendment to the motion on the establishment of the ad hoc committee on COVID-19 response management. Madam Speaker, this is simply because the member of Parliament who has moved this motion, Madam Speaker, has blatantly forgotten to include membership from members of Parliament, persons with disabilities.